You ready?
We're ready.
Section 2. You're going to check your air compressor and power steering pump. They both are gear driven. Make sure they're not bent, broke, or cracked, or leaking. All your nuts and bolts are all there and tight. Your dipstick, how would I check it? Pull it out, wipe it, put it back in. Pull it out, read it. Below the add line, we add by gallons, not by quarts. Your steering rod. Make sure it's not bent, broke, or cracked. Your nuts and bolts are all there and tight. Jump up here to your power steering reservoir. We check it here. We add it here. Make sure it's not bent, broke, or cracked, or leaking. All your nuts and bolts are all there and tight. Check your hoses coming down. Make sure they're not cracked or broke or leaking. And your clamps are all there and tight. Come down to your steering box. Make sure it's not bent, broke, or cracked, or leaking. Nuts and bolts are all there and tight. And since it has a zerk fitting, make sure that it's greased. This right here is called a Kelso nut. Kelso nut. Make sure it's there, it's tight, and it's not cracked or broke. Okay? From there, you're going to check your steering linkage from the front all the way to the back. Make sure it's not bent, broke, or cracked. Make sure all your nuts and bolts are all there and tight. Make sure your cotter pins are all there. Now from there, you're going to go to your shock absorber or your shock, however you want to say it. Make sure your shock is not bent, broken, cracked, or leaking. Your nuts and bolts are all there and tight. From there, drop down to your leaf spring and U-bolts. See them both together. Make sure they're not bent, broke, or cracked. Make sure all your nuts and bolts are all there and tight. Go from there, you're going to go to your spring mounts, front and back. Make sure they're not bent, broke, or cracked. Make sure your nuts and bolts are tight. And you could say, since it has a zerk fit, make sure it's greased. But they won't knock you for not saying it, so either or if you want to say it or not. Okay? Then from there, jump up here to your brake hose or your airline hose. However you want to say it. Brake line or air hose, however you want to say it. Make sure it's not cracked, broke, or leaking. Make sure your fittings is there and tight. This right here is called your brake chamber. Make sure it's not bent, broke, or cracked, or leaking, and make sure that it is tight. In front of it is your slack adjuster. You should have no more than 1 inch of play on your slack adjuster, and it should not be bent, broke, or cracked. Make sure your cotter pins and all your nuts and bolts are all there and tight. From there, jump into your brake drums and brake lining. Once again, they're not bent, broke, or cracked. Make sure you look for signs of oil, grease, or excessive heat, and you should have at least a 1/4 inch lift on your brake pads. Okay? From there, go to your tread and your sidewall. I'm checking for chunks, cracks, screws, and nails. I should have 4 30-seconds in the front, no more than 2 30-seconds, well, no less than 2 30-seconds in the back. Okay? From there, come down to your rim. Make sure it's not bent, broke, or cracked. No illegal welds. Your lug nuts, make sure they're all there and tight. Make sure there's no rust behind to indicate that they're being loose. Come to your hub. Make sure it's not bent, broke, or cracked and leaking. Make sure your nuts and bolts are all there and tight. We check it here and we add it here. Last thing you'll talk about is this valve stem. Make sure it's not or crack or leaking, and you check it with an air pressure gauge.